Before we dive in, I'd like to ask a small favor. I'm pouring all my energy into reaching my goal of 1,000 subscribers, which means the world to me. Please, I'm asking you to hit that subscribe button. It's just a single click, but it gives me tremendous motivation to keep creating more videos. Thank you so much. Eleanor Whitmore set her teacup down with an almost imperceptible click. Across the grand dining room, amidst 40 assembled guests, 40 witnesses to her husband's public disgrace, Nathaniel walked through the grand entrance of their home, another woman's arm linked through his. A woman whose swollen belly left nothing to the imagination. Nathaniel offered no apology. He didn't flinch. He met his wife's gaze across a room brimming with Virginia's finest and declared, "Charlotte will be staying here from now on." Eleanor rose, smoothed the fabric of her dress, and offered a smile. "Then I hope she enjoys the room she is borrowing." Subscribe and follow Eleanor's story to its very end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this goes. The letter arrived 3 weeks before the dinner. Eleanor found it herself, tucked deep within the lining of Nathaniel's traveling coat, which had been left carelessly draped over a library chair for the third consecutive morning. She hadn't been searching for anything. She'd merely picked up the coat to hand it to the housekeeper. As she did, the folded paper slipped out, landing face up on the floor. She retrieved it. She read it. Then, with meticulous care, she refolded it exactly as it had been, slipped it back into the lining, and placed the coat back over the chair. She then walked to her writing desk, sat down, opened the household ledger to the page she'd been working on, and picked up her pen. Her hand did not tremble. That was the precise moment Eleanor Whitmore understood the steel within her. Not on the night of the dinner, nor the following morning. Not when Charlotte descended the stairs, draped in yellow silk as if she owned the very floors beneath her feet. Not even when Nathaniel had the audacity to tell Eleanor to be reasonable, as if she were a petulant child refusing a dose of bitter medicine. It was that morning, with the letter, with the steady hand. She had known, in some wordless recess of her being she had long refused to acknowledge, about Nathaniel's unexplained trips to Richmond, about the new coat he hadn't bothered to mention, the way he had stopped meeting her eyes across the dinner table, not with guilt, but with the peculiar indifference of a man who had already moved on, patiently waiting for the opportune moment to announce it publicly. And he had certainly chosen a public moment. The Whitmore charitable dinner was Eleanor's creation. She had orchestrated every detail: the guest list, the menu, the musicians stationed in the East Corridor, the 40 invitations penned in her own elegant hand. Senator Aldridge, Judge Calloway, the esteemed Prescott family, and Mrs. Fenton, whose pronouncements could shape more reputations in Virginia than any newspaper ever printed. Eleanor herself wore a gown of sapphire silk. She moved through the room with the effortless grace of a woman who understood precisely what she had built and the profound cost it had entailed. She was 30 years old. She had been managing the Whitmore shipping ledgers since 1904. She had kept Hawthorne Hall running through lean harvests and brutal winters, and through a husband who was frequently absent. She had done it all without complaint, without a hint of grievance, without once allowing Virginia to glimpse anything but a woman utterly in control. She had earned this room, every soul within it, every flickering candle on every meticulously set table. She stood near the window, engaged in conversation with Judge Calloway's wife, when she heard the carriage. Not the measured clip-clop of a late arrival, but a fast, careless rush, the kind that announces an arrival without regard for what it might interrupt. She excused herself and made her way toward the entrance hall. She was 10 feet from the door when it swung open. Nathaniel Hawthorne stepped inside. He was 35, still possessed of that easy handsomeness often bestowed upon men who have always been told they possess it. A square jaw, an unshakable confidence, a bearing that read as authority until one had lived with it long enough to discern the subtle rot beneath the surface. He wore a coat Eleanor did not recognize. New, and another purchase she hadn't been privy to. He was not alone. The woman beside him was young, her hair the color of burnished copper, her face as if sculpted for a stage, Eleanor would later learn, where Nathaniel had indeed found her. Her green traveling dress, recently acquired, strained awkwardly across her shoulders. Someone had guessed at her measurements. Her condition, however, required no guessing. The room fell silent, not gradually, but all at once, like a collective, held breath. Nathaniel looked across the 40 most prominent citizens of Virginia, seated at his wife's table, beneath his wife's candles, partaking of food his wife had ordered, and showed not a flicker of shame. He held the woman's hand. He squared his shoulders. Charlotte will be staying here from now on. 7 words, utterly devoid of apology, explanation, or any private word to Eleanor first. Just the flat certainty of a man who had decided his convenience trumped every other consideration in the room. Mrs. Fenton made a small, involuntary sound into her wineglass. A fork clinked against a plate. Judge Calloway suddenly found the ceiling of great interest. 40 pairs of eyes swiveled to Eleanor. She felt each and every one of them. The pity, the morbid curiosity, the particular cruelty of a room full of people waiting for a woman to shatter before them. She did not shatter. Eleanor Whitmore stood motionless for 3 heartbeats. She looked at her husband. She looked at Charlotte, just Charlotte. No surname offered, no courtesy extended. And she looked at the hand Nathaniel was holding with a tenderness he hadn't shown his wife in longer than she could honestly recall. Then, she walked to the head of the table. She picked up her teacup. She turned to face the room and smiled, not from joy, but from a profound and unshakable decision. Then I hope she enjoys the room she is borrowing. Her voice did not waver. She set the cup down, her gaze sweeping over her guests with the composed air of a woman hosting a perfectly ordinary evening. Mrs. Aldridge, I believe the cook prepared the peach pudding you favored last season. Shall we move to dessert? The dinner continued. It was the bravest act Eleanor Whitmore had ever undertaken, and not a soul in that room would ever truly comprehend the cost it exacted from her. Charlotte did not retire to a guest room that night. Nathaniel installed her in the East Wing bedroom, the one with the largest fireplace, the morning sun, and the 4-poster bed that Eleanor had commissioned from a Boston cabinet maker in the first year of their marriage, when she had still believed the man she married was the man she thought she knew. Eleanor remained in the library long after the last guest had departed. Account books lay open before her, though she wasn't reading them. She heard Charlotte's laughter drift down from somewhere upstairs, theatrical, too loud, the laugh of a woman performing for an audience of one. Eleanor did not weep. She pulled a blank sheet of paper from the desk drawer and wrote a single word at the top: everything. Then, she began to list what she knew, and more importantly, what she did not yet know, but fully intended to discover. Charlotte appeared for breakfast the following morning as if she had always resided there. The yellow dress, Nathaniel's money, the casual ease of a woman who had been rehearsing this role for quite some time. She sat at the table and requested a different tea from Molly, the housekeeper. Gazing out at the garden, she remarked that she had always preferred formal hedges to wild flowers. Eleanor poured her coffee and said nothing. "You've been in Virginia long?" she inquired after a moment. Charlotte looked up. She had prepared for tears, for a scene. The unruffled calm across the table unsettled her. 6 months, she replied. Nathaniel has been very generous. He is a generous man, Eleanor said pleasantly, with other people's things. Charlotte's jaw tightened. He loves me. I'm certain he does. Eleanor turned a page in the ledger she had brought to breakfast. He loved a girl in Richmond 3 years ago as well, she stated calmly. She didn't stay long. The climate disagreed with her, I was told. Silence descended. Eleanor closed the ledger and stood. Welcome to Hawthorne Hall, Miss Pierce. I do hope you'll be comfortable. She picked up her coffee cup. For as long as you're here. She left Charlotte sitting alone at the table, with her expensive tea, her borrowed house, and the dawning realization of an opponent unlike anything she had anticipated. Nathaniel found Eleanor in the stables that afternoon. She was checking on the horses, a task she performed every week, having learned early in their marriage that if she didn't, it wouldn't be done. I expected this to go differently, he said. I imagine you did. She didn't look up from examining the bay mare's foreleg. Charlotte is carrying my child, Eleanor. I can see that. I need you to be reasonable about this situation. She straightened, turning to face him. He wore the expression of a man who had braced for a storm and found himself bewildered by the sudden stillness. Nathaniel, she said, her voice level, what exactly do you want from me, specifically? He shifted his weight. I'd like you to accept this with grace. You are a woman of standing. Grace, he prompted. She studied him for a long moment. This man, this man alongside whom she had built a life, who had borrowed against everything she had helped him construct, who had stood in her dining room and humiliated her before 40 witnesses, and now expected her to call it grace. I will behave, she said quietly, exactly as my character requires. She turned and walked back toward the house. Nathaniel said nothing behind her, for there was nothing left to say to a woman who had just refused to be managed. That evening, Eleanor wrote a letter. She penned it herself, sealed it with plain wax, and entrusted it to her most trusted, stable hand with strict instructions to ride to Charlottesville before first light. Mr. Samuel Reed, I need to see you, not as a family matter, but as a business one. Bring everything you have on Hawthorne's accounts for the past 3 years. Tell no one. Samuel Reed had been the Whitmore family's attorney since before Eleanor was born. He had advised her father through 3 expansions of the shipping company. He had stood as witness at Eleanor's wedding, with the quiet expression of a man who held concerns he had not been invited to share. He was 55, his hair iron gray, and constitutionally incapable of flattery. He was the only man in Virginia Eleanor trusted without reservation. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, while Nathaniel was in town. He carried his worn leather case. Eleanor led him into the library, closed the door, and did not offer tea. Tell me what you know, she said. Samuel looked at her with the careful eyes of a man measuring the weight of the words he was about to impart. How much do you wish to hear? All of it. He opened the case. What followed was an hour that irrevocably reshaped Eleanor's understanding of her own life. The Hawthorne estate, the land, the house, the horses, the timber rights in the western county had been leveraged quietly over 4 years. Nathaniel had borrowed against it repeatedly, not from a single lender, but from 4, each institution entirely unaware of the others. The debt was layered beneath transactions, meticulously structured to appear as routine estate business. He began before we married? Eleanor asked. The first mortgage was 6 months before the wedding, Samuel replied, his voice devoid of expression. She absorbed that, filed it away somewhere deep inside herself, and continued. The Whitmore shipping interests, my family's accounts. Samuel paused. Samuel, 3 vessels have been listed as collateral on the second agreement, he said, through a document signed in your name. I signed no such document. No, he confirmed. You did not. Silence. What is the total debt? She asked. He told her. The number was not the kind of catastrophe that announces itself with a deafening roar. It was the quiet kind, the insidious accumulation that builds within the walls for years before the damage becomes visible. Nathaniel Hawthorne was not a wealthy man. He was a performance of wealth, running on borrowed time and the dwindling patience of others. He doesn't know you're aware? Samuel inquired. No one knows, Eleanor replied. What I intend to do. What do you believe that to be, Samuel? He asked, watching her carefully. I intend to find out who holds the largest share of his debt. And when I find them, she paused, waiting for his response. I intend to become them, Eleanor stated. Something shifted in Samuel Reed's expression. It wasn't surprise, but something closer to relief. The relief of a man who had spent years worrying about someone and had just been shown he no longer needed to. Then he said, setting the first document on the desk between them, we had better start reading. The weeks that followed were the strangest performance of Eleanor's life. She smiled at dinner. She was civil to Charlotte, not warmly, but with the precise degree of courtesy that could not be criticized, and contained not one degree of warmth beyond what was required. She sat beside Nathaniel in the Sunday pew and nodded to neighbors and accepted their sideways condolences with composure, because Charlottesville did not know what to say to a woman in her position, and so said very little. Carefully, she gave them nothing to read. In private, she worked. Samuel brought documents. Eleanor read them. She understood debt instruments. She understood contract language. She understood better than Nathaniel had ever guessed exactly how men structured agreements when they believed women were not paying attention. She found the primary creditor on a Thursday night by lamplight at 2:30 in the morning. The largest single holder of Nathaniel Hawthorne's debt was a private lending firm in Richmond. 3 partners, 2 names she did not recognize. The third name was Gerald Whitmore, her uncle. Eleanor stared at the page. Then she pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer, dipped her pen. "Dear Uncle Gerald," she wrote. "I believe we have something to discuss." She did not sleep that night, but for the first time in weeks, she felt something she recognized as solid ground beneath her feet. Nathaniel had walked into her home and put another woman in her bed and waited for Eleanor to quietly surrender everything she had spent a decade building. He had made the mistake that men like him always make. He had looked at a quiet woman and seen defeat. He had not seen the letters going out before dawn. He had not seen Samuel Reed working by lamplight in a rented office, assembling documents with the precision of a man who understood that what they were building had to be unassailable. He had seen his wife set down her teacup and smile. He believed he had won. Eleanor Whitmore let him keep believing that, for now. The letter to Gerald Whitmore came back in 4 days. Not a reply, a visit. Eleanor was in the library when Molly knocked and said there was a gentleman at the door who had not given his name, but said his niece would know why he had come. Eleanor sat down. Her pen smoothed her dress and she said to show him in. Gerald Whitmore was 61 years old, built like a man who had spent his life making decisions other people had to live with. He had her father's jaw and none of her father's warmth. He had never approved of the Hawthorne match. He had said so once at the engagement dinner, quietly enough that only Eleanor heard. She had thanked him for his concern and married Nathaniel anyway. He walked into the library, looked at the documents spread across the desk and did not pretend to be surprised. "You found it," he said. "Sit down, Uncle Gerald." He sat. He looked at her the way people look at someone they have underestimated for a long time and are only now revising their accounting of. "How much do you know?" "I know about the 4 lenders," Eleanor said. "I know about the forged signature on the shipping collateral. I know your firm holds the largest single share of my husband's debt. And I know you have known about all of this for at least 2 years without telling me." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "I had reasons." "I'm certain you did. I'm not interested in them right now." She folded her hands on the desk. "I want to know if you are willing to sell me your position." He stared at her. "You want to buy the debt?" "I want to buy your share of it." "Yes, Eleanor. The amount involved. I am aware of the amount. I have been managing the Whitmore accounts since father's health declined. You know what those accounts hold." She met his eyes without flinching. "I am not asking whether I can afford it. I am asking whether you are willing to sell." Gerald Whitmore looked at his niece across the desk. This woman he had watched grow up, quiet and capable in a family that had not always noticed either quality. And something in his face changed, not softened, exactly, recalibrated. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. "I am planning to make sure that when Nathaniel Hawthorne reaches the end of his rope," Eleanor said, "I am the one holding it." Gerald looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a folded document, and set it on the desk between them. "I had this drawn up before I came," he said. "I thought you might ask." Eleanor looked at the document. Then she looked at her uncle. "You were waiting for me to figure it out." "I was waiting for you to be ready," he said. "There's a difference." She picked up the document and began to read. Charlotte had settled into Hawthorne Hall, the way water settles into a crack quietly, persistently, and with damage that only becomes visible later. She redecorated the front sitting room without asking. She dismissed 2 of the household Eleanor had employed for years and replaced them with people Nathaniel hired from Richmond. people whose loyalty ran in the direction of whoever was paying them most recently. She ordered a new set of china on the Hawthorne account and told the merchant in town that Mrs. Hawthorne had approved the purchase. Eleanor heard about the china from the merchant himself, who came to her privately, hat in hand, with the particular discomfort of a man caught between two women and smart enough to know which one he should actually be worried about. "I wouldn't have processed it, ma'am, if I'd known there was a question," he said. "There is no question, Mr. Holt," Eleanor said pleasantly. "Cancel the order, and do put it about quietly that any purchase made against this household's account requires my signature, not my husband's mine." Mr. Holt blinked. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for coming to me." He left, looking relieved. Eleanor turned back to her desk and made a note in the margin of her ledger. The note was 3 words: "She is spending." That was important because every dollar Charlotte spent on Nathaniel's account was a dollar charged against a man who was already drowning. And every charge brought the final reckoning one day closer. Eleanor had begun to understand that patience was not passive. Patience, wielded correctly, was the sharpest instrument she owned. It was Samuel who brought her the next piece. He arrived on a Wednesday morning with his leather case and an expression she had learned to read: the careful blankness of a man carrying information he knows will land hard. "The third lender," he said, setting a document on the desk. "A Mr. Clarence Booth of Richmond. I've spoken with his clerk." Eleanor looked at the page. "Booth is in trouble of his own. Poor investments last year, a lawsuit from a business partner. He needs to liquidate several positions before the end of the quarter." Samuel paused. "He is willing to sell Hawthorne's note quietly for slightly less than face value." Eleanor felt the thing that had been building in her chest for weeks sharpen into focus. "How much less?" Samuel told her. "Buy it," she said. "Eleanor, between your uncle's share and this, buy it, Samuel." He looked at her over the rims of his spectacles. "You'll control nearly 60% of his total debt." "I'm aware. When he defaults?" "When he defaults," Eleanor said, "I will be the one who decides what happens next." "That is precisely the point." She stood, moved to the window, stood with her back to the room for a moment. "How long does Booth need?" 2 weeks. Tell him he has 10 days. I'll pay the legal fees." Samuel made a note. He did not argue. He had stopped arguing with Eleanor Whitmore approximately 3 weeks ago, around the time he realized that every decision she made was 3 steps ahead of the one he had been about to suggest. Nathaniel noticed nothing. That was the part that would have broken Eleanor's heart if she had still had enough feeling for him left to break. He moved through Hawthorne Hall in the comfortable way of a man who believes his home is a fixed thing, permanent, unconditional, immune to consequence. He hosted Charlotte at his table. He brought her to the Richmond Theatre. He introduced her at a small supper in town as his companion, with the brazenness of a man who had decided that his reputation could absorb whatever damage that introduction caused. It could not, but no one in that room was willing to tell him so to his face. Eleanor heard about the supper from Mrs. Aldridge, who came to call on a Thursday afternoon with the careful manner of a woman delivering news she knows is wanted. "I thought you should hear it from someone who has your interest at heart," Mrs. Aldridge said. "I appreciate that," Eleanor said. She poured the tea herself. "How did she present?" Mrs. Aldridge hesitated confidently, and Nathaniel, proud. "Mrs. Aldridge said with the tone of someone using the word as a diagnosis. He looked proud. Eleanor handed her the cup. "Men often do," she said. "Right up until they don't." Mrs. Aldridge looked at her across the tea table with an expression that was somewhere between admiration and concern. "Eleanor, how are you truly?" Eleanor considered the question honestly, which was not something she did often in company. "I am working," she said. "It helps. Working on the accounts, among other things." The older woman studied her for a moment. Then she set her cup down and leaned slightly forward. "Whatever you are doing," she said, "I hope you know that there are people in this county who are watching and who are not watching with Nathaniel." Eleanor met her eyes. "I know," she said, and I am grateful. The second twist arrived not from Samuel's documents, but from Charlotte herself. Eleanor had not expected that. It was a Sunday evening. Nathaniel had gone to bed early. He had been drinking more than usual, which Eleanor noted without surprise, because men who are quietly going under often find the same relief in the same places. Eleanor was in the library. The house was quiet. Charlotte knocked. Not the knock of a woman with authority, a smaller sound, uncertain. "Come in," Eleanor said. Charlotte opened the door and stood in the frame. She looked different without the performance, younger and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. She wore a plain wrapper, her copper hair loose, and for the first time since she had arrived at Hawthorne Hall, she looked like what she actually was. A 23-year-old woman a long way from home in a situation that had not developed the way she had been told it would. "I didn't come here to make an enemy of you," Charlotte said. Eleanor set down her pen. "Sit down, Miss Pierce." Charlotte sat. She looked at the desk, at the documents, at the ordered precision of Eleanor's work. And Eleanor watched her absorb it, the intelligence behind it, the deliberateness of it, in a way that Nathaniel never had and never would. "He told me you were cold," Charlotte said, "that you didn't care about the marriage, that it had been finished for years." "He told you what was useful to him," Eleanor said. Charlotte looked at her hands. "He said he would take care of me, the baby, that once things were settled here, we would, he said there was money." "There is no money, Miss Pierce." Charlotte looked up. "There is debt," Eleanor said. "A great deal of it. Your child's father is a man who has been spending what he does not have for 4 years. Whatever he promised you was built on a foundation he does not possess." She kept her voice level because the woman across from her was frightened, and frightened people needed steadiness, not punishment. "I am telling you this not to be cruel. I am telling you because you have a child coming, and you deserve to understand the ground you are standing on." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than Eleanor had heard it. "What happens to me when whatever you're doing, when it's done?" "That depends on you," Eleanor said. "You are not my enemy, Miss Pierce. You are a woman who was lied to by a man who lies fluently. That does not make us allies, but it does mean I have no interest in your destruction." Charlotte looked at her with an expression that was almost impossible to read. Gratitude and resentment and confusion all pressed together. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Eleanor said, someone should have told you sooner." Charlotte left the library without another word. Eleanor watched the door close, then picked up her pen and sat with it in her hand without writing for a long moment. She had not planned that conversation, but it had told her something important. Charlotte was not the enemy. Charlotte was evidence of what Nathaniel Hawthorne did to people who trusted him. And Eleanor had a feeling that before everything was finished, that evidence would matter. 3 days later, Samuel arrived with news that changed the shape of the entire campaign. He came early, before breakfast, which he had never done before. Eleanor met him in the library in her morning dress, her hair still down, because whatever was in that leather case could not wait for ordinary courtesy. "The fourth lender," Samuel said, opening the case without preamble. "A consortium out of Philadelphia. I've been trying to reach their legal representative for 6 weeks, and Nathaniel approached them last month for an additional loan." Samuel set the document on the debt. "They've agreed to lend. The papers are being drawn up." Eleanor looked at the page. "He's borrowing more against the remaining unencumbered parcel of Hawthorne land, the North Timber lot. It's the last asset with clear title." Samuel paused. "If he completes this loan, Eleanor, the total debt will trigger a covenant in the original estate deed, a clause his father's attorneys inserted in 1803 that Nathaniel apparently never read carefully." Eleanor looked up from the page. "What does the clause say?" "It says," Samuel said with the quiet precision of a man delivering the exact sentence he has been building toward for weeks, "that if the estate's total encumbrance exceeds a specific threshold, all debt instruments become immediately callable at once by any creditor holding more than 50% of the total." The library was very quiet. "I hold 60%, Eleanor said. You will hold 62 once Mr. Booth's transfer is complete, which will be Thursday. Eleanor set the document down on the desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Samuel Reed across the desk, this careful, iron-haired man who had spent 6 weeks quietly dismantling her husband's financial life, one document at a time. And she said, "He is going to sign the Philadelphia loan. His attorney expects the papers to be executed within the month." "Let him sign it," Eleanor said. Samuel nodded slowly. When he does," Eleanor said, "everything becomes callable, and I will call it." She stood, walked to the window. Outside, she could hear the house beginning its morning, the distant sounds of the kitchen, a door closing somewhere upstairs. There's the ordinary noise of a household that did not yet know it was about to change hands. "Samuel," she said without turning around, "how long from the moment he signs until we can execute?" 2 weeks, perhaps 3, to do it cleanly. Then we wait for him to sign. She turned back from the window. "And we do not wait loudly." Samuel closed his case. He stood at the door. He paused the way he sometimes did when there was a thing he wanted to say, and was deciding whether to say it. "Your father would have been proud of you," he said. "I want you to know that." Eleanor looked at him. "Thank you, Samuel." He left. She stood alone in the library with the documents spread across the desk. Weeks of careful work, a campaign built on patience and precision, and the willingness to hold herself absolutely still. While the man across from her walked steadily toward the edge, he did not know was there. She did not feel triumphant. Not yet. What she felt was something quieter and more solid than triumph. She felt certain. The way you feel certain when a thing you have been working toward for a long time finally becomes visible in its full shape, when you can see from where you are standing exactly how it ends. Nathaniel Hawthorne was going to sign that loan. He was going to do it because he was a man who had never once considered that the woman he had humiliated in front of 40 witnesses might be the most dangerous person in his life. He was going to do it because he had looked at Eleanor setting down her teacup and seen a woman accepting defeat. He had not seen her pick up a pen. Nathaniel signed the Philadelphia loan on a Tuesday morning in the first week of April. Samuel sent word to Eleanor by midday. Not a long letter. 4 words written on a single strip of paper, folded once and delivered by hand. "He has done it." Eleanor read it at her desk, set it face down beside the inkwell, and sat quietly for a moment with her hands flat on the wood. Then she picked up her pen and wrote 2 letters, one to Samuel, one to her Uncle Gerald. Both said the same thing, in different words. Begin. That was all. Because everything that needed to be said had already been said in the weeks of preparation that preceded this moment. Every document reviewed, every clause verified, every legal instrument checked and rechecked by Samuel's meticulous hand. The machine had been built. Nathaniel had just provided the final piece without knowing he was doing it. What Eleanor had not anticipated was what Nathaniel announced at dinner that same evening. He came to the table in high spirits, the particular brightness of a man who believes he has just solved a problem. Unaware that the solution is the problem, he poured his own wine before the decanter had even reached him. He looked across the table at Eleanor with the easy confidence of someone who has stopped worrying about his opponent because he no longer believes he has one. "I've decided to host a ball," he said. Eleanor lifted her eyes from her plate. "A ball? A spring ball. The grandest Virginia has seen in years. Charlotte deserves to be properly introduced to society." He said it. The way men say things they have already decided. Things that are not questions dressed as announcements. "We'll invite everyone. Open the East Lawn. Hire musicians from Richmond. Make it an occasion people remember." Eleanor looked at him. The man across from her was spending money he had just borrowed on an event to celebrate the woman he had installed in her home, in a house that would not belong to him in approximately 14 days. "What a lovely idea," Eleanor said. Nathaniel blinked. He had expected resistance, or, at minimum, a silence that required navigation. The pleasantness caught him off guard. "You think so? A spring ball at Hawthorne Hall?" "I think all of Virginia should be there," Eleanor said. She picked up her fork and returned to her dinner. Across the table, Nathaniel smiled with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had just been given permission. He did not notice that his wife had not looked at him once since she spoke. The invitations went out the next morning. Nathaniel drafted the guest list himself. Every prominent family in the county, the senator, the judge, the Prescotts, the Fentons, every name that mattered in Charlottesville and the surrounding districts, he was generous with the list. He wanted witnesses. So did Eleanor. She sent her own note to Samuel that afternoon. The ball is in 3 weeks. Whatever we are going to do, we do it that night. Samuel's reply came before supper. Understood. I will be there. Charlotte threw herself into the preparations with an energy that would have been admirable under different circumstances. She consulted with the Richmond merchants about decorations. She ordered flowers. She chose the menu over Eleanor's head and informed Molly about the changes with the breezy authority of a woman who had fully convinced herself that the title of Mistress of Hawthorne Hall was already hers. Molly came to Eleanor afterward, quietly in the kitchen corridor, with her hands folded and her expression carefully neutral. Miss Charlotte has made some changes to the evening's arrangements. Ma'am, Eleanor said. Letter. Molly studied her. Molly had worked at Hawthorne Hall for 11 years. She had watched Eleanor manage the household through every difficulty with the same steady competence, and she was not a woman easily confused. But there was something in Eleanor's manner over the past weeks, a quality of precision, of deliberate stillness, that Molly had identified as something other than acceptance. Will there be anything you need from me that evening, ma'am? She asked. Eleanor looked at her. Yes, she said. I need you to make sure the library is unlocked and a lamp is lit in the evening. Molly nodded. She did not ask why. And Molly, Eleanor added, wear your good dress. 2 days before the ball, Charlotte came to Eleanor again, not uncertain this time. Something had changed in her since their conversation in the library, a weariness that lived behind her eyes, now a new carefulness in how she moved through the house. She was not Eleanor's ally, but she was no longer quite Nathaniel's instrument either. She had begun to think for herself, which was the most dangerous thing a woman in her position could do, and Eleanor respected her for it, even as she remained guarded. He is planning to announce the baby at the ball, Charlotte said. She stood in the doorway of the library and said it without softening, formally, in front of everyone. Eleanor did not look up from her documents immediately. Then she did. He told you this last night. He said it was time to make things official. Charlotte stopped, a small pause that carried a great deal of weight. He said you had accepted the situation, that you were comfortable with however things proceeded. He said that. Yes. Eleanor set her pen down. And do you believe him? Charlotte looked at her for a long, honest moment. No, she said. Not anymore. Eleanor studied the young woman in her doorway, the copper hair, the tired eyes, the hand resting instinctively over the curve of her belly, and she felt something that was not quite pity and not quite solidarity, but existed somewhere in the difficult territory between them. Charlotte, she said quietly, when the evening is over, whatever happens, do you have somewhere to go? Family. Charlotte's expression shifted. My mother in Fredericksburg. Good, Eleanor said. Keep that in mind. Charlotte looked at her for another moment. Then she nodded once and left without asking what Eleanor meant. She was beginning to understand that Eleanor never said more than she intended to, and that everything she said was worth paying attention to. The night of the ball arrived, warm and clear. By 7, Hawthorne Hall held half of Virginia's finest families. The musicians Nathaniel had hired from Richmond were good. Eleanor would grant him that. The rooms were lit well. The flowers Charlotte had ordered were excessive but effective. From the outside, in the candlelight, the house looked exactly like what Nathaniel wanted it to look like, the home of a man of consequence at the height of his social standing, celebrating his own importance. Charlotte descended the main staircase at 7 in a gown of ivory and gold that Nathaniel had paid for with money he had borrowed 3 weeks ago. She moved through the room with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent years on stages, and the guests, many of whom had been rehearsing their reactions for weeks, managed their expressions with varying degrees of success. Mrs. Fenton, standing near the fireplace with a glass of wine and the expression she reserved for things she found simultaneously outrageous and entertaining, caught Eleanor's eye across the room and held it for exactly 1 second. Eleanor offered the barest of nods. Nathaniel was in his element. Eleanor watched him from across the room, a blur of movement from guest to guest, his laughter a touch too loud, accepting congratulations on the evening with the expansive, unearned warmth of a man who had never once paused to consider that the applause might be for his wife's house rather than his own merit. He had dressed with care. On the surface, he was precisely the man he had always believed himself to be. Eleanor wore gray silk. She had chosen it deliberately, neither dramatic nor attention-seeking. It was the color of a woman who isn't trying to be noticed, because the woman who doesn't need to be noticed is always the most dangerous one in the room. At 8, Samuel Reed arrived. He came through the front door in his good coat, his leather case in hand, and moved through the crowded entrance hall with the quiet efficiency of a man not there to enjoy the party. He found Eleanor near the library corridor without difficulty, because she was exactly where she had told him she would be. "It's done," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "The paperwork is complete, signed, witnessed, and dated. Today," she said, touching the case, "everything is in here, and the clause is triggered. The moment you sign the Philadelphia papers, yes, the threshold was crossed. As of this morning, every debt instrument is legally callable." He paused. "You can call them tonight, if you choose." Eleanor looked out at the room, at Nathaniel pouring wine for the senator, at Charlotte accepting a compliment from Mrs. Prescott with a smile that had not yet learned it was standing on ice, at 40 guests in her house eating food she had ultimately paid for in rooms she had managed for a decade, beneath a name she had carried with more care than the man who bore it by birth. "Not yet," she said. "Let him make his announcement." Samuel looked at her. "You want him to announce the child publicly." "I want every person in this room to be a witness," Eleanor said, "to what he is and to what comes next." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, are you certain?" "I have been certain since the morning I found that letter in his coat," she said. "I just needed the rest of the world to catch up." Nathaniel made his announcement at 9. He tapped his glass in the center of the main room, waited for quiet with the patience of a man who assumes silence is always available to him. And when the room had stilled, he brought Charlotte to stand beside him, his hand at the small of her back. "Friends," he said, "I have the privilege tonight of sharing joyful news. Miss Charlotte Pierce, who many of you are meeting this evening, is expecting my child. I intend to acknowledge this child fully, as is right, and I trust you will all join me in welcoming this new chapter at Hawthorne Hall." The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, not shock most of the room had known or suspected since the August dinner. It was the silence of people recalibrating, of people looking very carefully at Eleanor. Eleanor stood near the east wall with her wine glass and an expression of perfect composure. She did not look wounded. She did not look angry. She looked like a woman listening to a piece of information that did not affect her plans in the slightest, because it didn't. Senator Aldridge cleared his throat. Someone began a tentative applause that did not spread. Nathaniel did not seem to notice the temperature of the room. He was already moving toward the next group of guests, Charlotte on his arm, riding a wave of self-satisfaction that had no floor beneath it. Mrs. Fenton materialized at Eleanor's elbow. "My dear," she said, very quietly, "I hope you know what you're doing." "I do," Eleanor said. "Because whatever you're doing, and I have a very strong suspicion, it is something significant. You should know that you have friends in this room who will stand by whatever you decide." Eleanor turned to look at her. "Mrs. Fenton was 63 years old, had outlasted 2 husbands and a financial scandal that had destroyed lesser families, and had spent 4 decades being the most reliable reader of character in Charlottesville. She was not offering comfort. She was offering alliance. "I know," Eleanor said, "and I will need you to simply watch. That's all, just watch." Mrs. Fenton's expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. "Then I will watch very closely," she said, and moved back into the crowd. At 9, Eleanor found Nathaniel near the study door, momentarily alone, refilling his glass from a decanter on the side table. She walked up beside him and stood there quietly until he noticed her. He turned, his expression was careful. The look of a man who had been waiting all evening for a confrontation that hadn't materialized and was beginning to suspect that its absence was more significant than its presence would have been. "Eleanor," he said. "Nathaniel," she said. "It's a lovely evening. I thought it went well." He was watching her. The announcement, it was very clear. She studied his face for a moment. "I know this has been difficult," she said. "I have one question. Did you read the covenant clause in your father's deed? The one from 1803. A pause. A small one. But Eleanor had become very good at reading small pauses. "What clause?" "The encumbrance threshold," she said. "The clause that makes all debt instruments callable simultaneously when the estate's total obligation exceeds a specific amount." She tilted her head slightly. "The clause that was triggered 3 weeks ago when you signed the first Philadelphia paper and confirmed this morning when the transfer of Mr. Booth's note completed." Nathaniel's expression changed, not dramatically. A subtle draining, like water pulling back before a wave. "What are you talking about?" he said, but the voice was different. The ease was gone. "I'm talking," Eleanor said quietly, "about the fact that as of this morning, you owe more than this estate can cover. The covenant has been triggered, and the holder of the majority of your debt has the legal right to call every note at once." She watched his face. "All of it, Nathaniel, simultaneously." He stared at her. Who holds the majority?" Eleanor picked up her wineglass from the table beside her. She looked at her husband across it with the calm of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. "I do," she said. The color left Nathaniel Hawthorne's face so completely and so quickly that for a moment he looked like a man who had just been told something in a language he didn't know he didn't speak. His mouth opened, closed, his hand tightened on the wineglass. He started. "Legal," Eleanor said, fully. "Samuel has the documents, every transfer recorded, every signature witnessed, every clause verified by counsel." She set her glass down. "You have been borrowing against this estate for 4 years, Nathaniel. Against my family's shipping interests, against land you leveraged before we were married, against a future you constructed on paper and invited me to live inside without telling me it had no walls." "Eleanor, I am not finished." Her voice was still quiet, still level. "You brought another woman into my home. You humiliated me before everyone I know. You forged my name on a financial instrument." She looked at him steadily. "And you did all of it because you believed I would not understand what you had done. Because you looked at me and saw a woman who managed your household and your accounts and asked nothing, and you mistook that for weakness." The study door was partially open. The music from the main room drifted in. 40 guests, 20 feet away, celebrating a spring evening in a house that was no longer his. "What are you going to do?" Nathaniel said. His voice had lost everything, the ease, the confidence, the careless authority. What was left was smaller and far more honest than anything Eleanor had heard from him in years. "Tonight," she said, "nothing. Tonight is still a party." She picked up her glass again. "But tomorrow morning, Samuel Reed will be in this house at 9, and we will discuss in detail and with documentation exactly what comes next." She walked back toward the main room. At the doorway, she paused just for a moment without turning around. "Enjoy the ball, Nathaniel," she said. "You paid handsomely for it." She stepped back into the light and noise of the party, and behind her, Nathaniel Hawthorne stood alone in the half-dark of the study with an empty glass and the specific silence of a man who has just understood fully and finally that he has already lost. Nathaniel did not sleep that night. Eleanor knew, because she did not sleep either, and Hawthorne Hall was a house she understood the way a musician understands an instrument: every creak, every settling sound, every particular silence that meant something. She heard him moving through the east corridor at midnight, heard the study door open and close twice, heard the sound of a decanter being lifted from the sideboard in the dark. She lay in her bed with her eyes open and felt nothing she had not already made peace with. At some point before dawn, she heard Charlotte's voice, low, urgent, asking a question she couldn't make out through the wall. Then Nathaniel's voice, harder and shorter than she'd ever heard it. Then silence, the kind of silence that follows a conversation that has broken something that cannot be repaired. Eleanor rose at 6, dressed herself without calling for help, went to the library, and sat with her hands around a cup of coffee. The final set of documents spread before her, already reviewed, already in order, already exact. She read through them one more time anyway, not because she doubted them, but because she needed the steadiness of familiar work beneath her hands before the morning began. Samuel arrived at 8:30. 30 minutes early, he knocked at the library door and came in with his leather case, and the expression of a man who had also not slept, but for different reasons. The sharp-eyed alertness of someone who had prepared for a confrontation and was ready to walk into it. "He's in the house?" Samuel asked. "He hasn't left," Eleanor said, "and Miss Pierce, upstairs." Eleanor stood. "Give him until 9. Let him come to us." Samuel set his case on the desk and began laying out the documents in the order they had agreed on. Not randomly, not casually, but with the deliberate architecture of an argument that built from foundation to conclusion. Each page a step, each step unavoidable. They did not wait long. Nathaniel came through the library door at 8 minutes to 9, and the man who entered was not the man who had hosted a ball the previous evening. He had dressed, but carelessly, his coat not fully fastened, his tie loose, the particular dishevelment of someone who had made an effort and run out of conviction halfway through. He looked at the documents on the desk and then at Eleanor standing beside it, and something moved through his face that was not quite fear and not quite anger, but occupied the territory where those two things live when they arrive together. "You could have told me last night," he said. "You could have done this privately." "I gave you the evening," Eleanor said, sitting down. Nathaniel did not sit. "I want to know the full amount." "What you're claiming." Samuel Reed picked up the first document and set it on the edge of the desk, facing Nathaniel. "This is the transfer instrument for the debt originally held by your uncle's firm," he said in the precise, unhurried voice of a man who has rehearsed this and does not need to rush it. "Executed legally, witnessed, recorded with the county. Eleanor Whitmore holds this note outright." He set the next document beside it. "This is the transfer of Mr. Clarence Booth's position. Same process, same standing." Another page. "These are the original mortgage instruments." All 4 lenders, all 4 agreements cross-referenced against the covenant clause in the 1803 Hawthorne estate deed. He set the final document on top of the rest. "This," Samuel said, "is the covenant itself. Your father's attorneys inserted it as a protection against precisely this kind of situation. It requires that any holder of more than 50% of total encumbrance may call all notes simultaneously upon breach of the threshold." He folded his hands. "The threshold was breached when you signed the Philadelphia Agreement. Eleanor holds 62%. The call is legal, documented, and effective as of this morning." Nathaniel stared at the papers. He picked up the covenant document, read it, set it down. Picked up the transfer instrument. Eleanor watched him read his own financial destruction line by line, and she felt not triumph, but the exhausted clarity of a thing finally finished. "The house," he said. His voice had gone flat. "The house is the primary asset against the largest note," Samuel said. "Yes, the North Timber Lot collateral on the Philadelphia loan, which is now the horses listed in the secondary mortgage." Nathaniel set the document down very carefully, like a man handling something fragile. And Eleanor understood that what he was actually handling carefully was himself, the last remaining pieces of a composure he could feel dissolving. "The Richmond accounts," he said. "I have personal accounts in Richmond that are separate from the estate." "You have one account in Richmond," Samuel said. "It holds enough to cover approximately 3 months of personal expenses at your current rate of spending. It is not attached to the estate and is therefore not callable. It is, however, the only unencumbered asset you possess. The room was very quiet. Everything else, Nathaniel said, not a question. Everything attached to the Hawthorne estate name, Samuel confirmed. Yes, Nathaniel turned to look at Elalana. Really look at her, maybe for the first time in years. Not through the comfortable film of assumption and dismissal, but directly, as one person looks at another when all the social performance has been stripped away and there is nothing left between them but the truth. How long have you been planning this? Since the morning I found the letter in your coat, Elalana said. He absorbed that. 3 weeks before the dinner. Yes, you knew before that night, before Charlotte came into this house. I knew enough, Elalana said. I knew the rest by the end of September. Something crossed his face then, and Elalana, who had spent years learning to read what Nathaniel Hawthorne actually felt beneath what he chose to show, recognized it with a clarity that surprised her. It was not anger, it was shame. Genuine, unperformed shame. The kind that arrives when a person finally sees themselves the way others have been seeing them for a long time. Elalana, he said, and the way he said it was different from every other time he had said her name in the past decade. Smaller, more honest. I don't, she said, not harshly, just firmly. Not now, not after everything. Whatever you want to say, I have heard every version of it already in my own head, in your voice, and none of them change what happened in this house. He closed his mouth. You brought a woman into my home, Elalana said. In front of every person whose respect I had spent 10 years earning. You forged my name on a legal document. You leveraged my family's ships without my knowledge. And you did all of it while I was managing your accounts, your household, your estate, while I was the reason any of this existed at all. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I am not asking for an apology, Nathaniel. I am telling you what happened so that when you tell this story later and you will tell it, you will not be able to tell it wrong. Charlotte came downstairs at 9. Elalana heard her on the stairs before she appeared in the library doorway. That particular careful step of a woman navigating unfamiliar ground, feeling for what is solid. She stopped in this doorway when she saw the documents on the desk, the 3 people in the room, the expression on Nathaniel's face. She looked at Elalana. Is it done? It is done, Elalana said. Charlotte looked at Nathaniel, and Elalana watched something happen between them in that moment, the final dissolution of whatever story Charlotte had been living inside. The story where Nathaniel was the man he had presented himself to be. The story where the promises he had made were the kind of promises a man with means could keep. It left Charlotte's face the way color leaves a painting left too long in the sun, gradually and then all at once. You told me there was money, Charlotte said to him. Her voice was not accusatory. It was simply exhausted. You told me the house was clear. You said Elalana had her own income and the estate was yours free and clear. And that our child would— Charlotte, Nathaniel said. Don't. She used the same word Elalana had used, and Nathaniel flinched at the echo of it. Don't say my name like that. Don't use that voice. She pressed her hand over her belly, the instinctive, protective gesture of a woman who has understood that the only person she can fully rely on in this room is the one not yet born. What happens to me? To the baby? Elalana spoke before Nathaniel could. That child is not responsible for any of this, she said. Whatever agreement you and Nathaniel reach regarding the child's welfare is between you and him. But I will tell you plainly, Miss Pierce, that I have no intention of leaving you without recourse. Charlotte looked at her. Why? Because you were lied to, Elalana said. Systematically and deliberately. That does not excuse every choice you made. But it does mean you are not my enemy, and I do not make war on people who are not my enemies. Charlotte stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she looked at Nathaniel one last time, a look that carried everything and forgave nothing, and she said, I'm going to Fredericksburg. I'll send for my things. She left the doorway. They heard her on the stairs. They heard the sound of her moving through the upper hall. Then the sound of a door closing, and then quiet. Nathaniel stood with his hands at his sides and said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was the voice of a man who has run out of alternatives and knows it. "What do you need from me?" "Your signature," Samuel said, and produced the final document from the case. The formal acknowledgement of the debt call and the transfer of estate administration to Eleanor Whitmore pending legal resolution of all outstanding obligations. If you sign that," Samuel said, "the process is orderly, the estate is managed, the debts are resolved without public legal action." He paused. "If you do not sign, Elalana has the legal standing to pursue formal foreclosure through the county court, which is public, which will involve every detail of every transaction appearing in the record." Nathaniel looked at Elalana. "You'd do that. I would do whatever is necessary to protect what is mine," Elalana said. "I would prefer not to, but I will not hesitate." He picked up the pen. Elalana watched his hand move across the page. The signature she had seen on 1,000 documents, on household accounts and shipping contracts and social correspondence, now signing away the last of what he had spent 4 years dismantling. And she felt the strangest thing. Not satisfaction. Something more like grief. Not for the marriage and not for him, but for the version of this life she had believed in once, when she was young enough to believe that love and honesty were things you could take for granted in another person. She had learned better. She had paid for the education, and she had made something from it. He signed, set the pen down, stepped back from the desk. "Where am I supposed to go?" he said. "You have the Richmond account," Samuel said. "Enough for 3 months. I would suggest using that time wisely." Nathaniel looked around the library, the shelves of books, the desk, the lamp, the ordered precision of a room that had always functioned as Elalana's more than his, and he looked at it with the eyes of a man seeing something for the last time, understanding its value only in the moment of losing it. "I built this house," he said. It was not an argument. It was something closer to bewilderment. "Your father built this house," Elalana said, not unkindly. "You inherited it. There is a difference." She met his eyes. "And I kept it running for 10 years. That is also a difference." He had nothing to say to that, because it was true, and he knew it was true. And the specific weight of a truth you have known and ignored for a long time is heavier than any truth you encounter for the first time. He walked out of the library. Elalana and Samuel listened to his footsteps in the entrance hall, the sound of the front door opening, the particular silence of a house after someone has left it for the last time. Samuel began gathering the documents into his case with the methodical care he brought to everything. "It's over," he said. "The legal part," Elalana said. He looked up. "The legal part is over," she said again. She sat down in the chair behind her desk in her library in her house, and she put her hands flat on the wood, the way she had the morning she found the letter. But it felt different now. The wood felt different. The room felt different. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked. Elalana thought about the question honestly. She thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago, signing her name in a church and believing that the man beside her was the beginning of something good. She thought about the letter in the coat, and the steady hand, and the long months of quiet work that had brought her to this morning. "I'm not sure yet," she said. "Ask me again in a week." Samuel closed his case. He picked up his hat from the chair where he'd placed it. At the door, he paused the way he always did when there was one more thing to say. "What will you do with it?" he asked. "The estate, now that it's yours to manage outright." Elalana looked at the window. Outside, the spring morning was doing what spring mornings do, indifferent to human drama, relentlessly continuing. "Something worth doing," she said. Samuel Reed nodded once, put on his hat, and left. Elalana sat alone in the library for a long time. The house was quiet around her, not the heavy quiet of a house holding its breath, but the clear quiet of a house that has exhaled. She could hear Molly in the kitchen. She could hear birdsong through the glass, ordinary sounds. The sounds of a life that was hers now, fully and without condition, to build into whatever she decided it should be. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer. At the top, she wrote one word, not everything this time. This time she wrote, "Begin." and beneath it, she began. The word begin sat at the top of that page for 3 days before Elalana wrote anything beneath it, not because she didn't know what she wanted. She had known for months longer, if she was honest, longer than the letter in the coat, longer than the dinners eaten in careful silence, longer than the first time she had looked across the table at Nathaniel and understood that the man she had married had never once looked back at her and seen what was actually there. She had known what she wanted since she was 19 years old, and sitting with her father's ledgers, understanding for the first time that numbers told the truth, even when people didn't. She waited 3 days because she wanted to be sure she was building from solid ground and not from anger. Anger was a fast fuel. It burned hot, and it burned out. And Elalana had not come this far to build something that collapsed when the anger did. On the fourth morning, she picked up the pen, and she wrote for 2 hours without stopping. By the time Molly knocked to bring coffee, the page was full, and 2 more had been started. "You look different," Molly said, setting the cup down. "Do I?" "You look like yourself," Molly said. "The way you used to." She said it simply, without sentiment. The way a woman says a true thing when she has been waiting a long time to say it. And then she left Eleanor to her work. Eleanor read that back the way you used to and felt it land somewhere real. She hadn't realized until someone named it how long she hadn't been herself. How much of her energy had gone into managing Nathaniel's failures, into maintaining appearances, into performing the role of a woman whose life was in order, while quietly holding everything together underneath. She had been so busy keeping the house from falling that she had forgotten to ask what she would build once it was hers. Now she knew. The first thing Eleanor did was call in every debt Nathaniel owed to local tradespeople, not to collect, but to forgive. She went through the household accounts, the merchant bills. Nathaniel had deferred the craftsmen he had kept waiting, the suppliers he had strung along with partial payments and promises, and she settled every one of them in full, in person where she could manage it, because she believed a debt paid deserved to be acknowledged face to face. Mr. Holt at the general store looked at the bank draft she placed on his counter, and then looked at her with the expression of a man who has been holding his breath for a long time. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "this covers. This is more than it includes the interest on the delay." Eleanor said, "That was your money. You should have had it sooner." He shook his head slowly. "I heard what happened with Mr. Hawthorne." "Most people have," Eleanor said. "I want you to know." He stopped, started again. "You've been doing business in this town for 10 years, ma'am, and there is not one person on this street who doesn't know whose hand kept that estate running." He looked at her steadily. "Whatever you're building next, you have friends here." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. "I'm going to need a reliable supplier for construction materials," she said. "Later this summer, would you be interested in a long-term arrangement?" Mr. Holt's expression shifted into something that looked like the beginning of hope. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I would." She shook his hand across the counter the way her father had taught her, firmly, once, and looking the other person in the eye, and she moved on to the next name on her list. Samuel came to her at the end of the first week with a question she had been expecting. "The North Timber lot," he said, "now that the Philadelphia loan has been resolved and the lot reverts to the estate, what do you want to do with it?" Eleanor had been thinking about the North Timber lot since February, when she had first understood it was the last unencumbered parcel and Nathaniel was about to sign it away. She had thought about it practically, and she had thought about it symbolically, and in the end, both lines of thinking had arrived at the same place. "I want to build a school," she said. Samuel looked up from his documents. "On the timber lot?" "The timber can be harvested selectively enough to fund the construction, with the right-of-way preserved so the land stays usable. There are 43 children in this county, with no access to formal instruction beyond what their parents can provide. Most of them are the children of workers and tradespeople. Some of them are exceptional, and no one is giving them the chance to find that out." She set her pen down. "I want to build them a schoolhouse. I want to hire 2 teachers, and I want it running before winter." Samuel looked at her over his spectacles for a long moment. "That is an ambitious timeline." I'm aware it will require. I have already drafted the figures, Eleanor said, and slid a page across the desk. The selective timber harvest covers the construction costs. The Whitmore shipping income covers the operating budget for the first 3 years. After that, it should be self-sustaining through community contribution if we structure the founding correctly. Samuel looked at the page. He read it. He turned it over and read the back. He set it down and looked at Eleanor with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the measured approval of a lawyer reviewing competent work, but something more personal than that. Something that looked like wonder. "You've been planning this since before the ball," he said. "Since October," Eleanor said. "I needed to know the estate would be solvent first. There was no point planning construction if I wasn't going to be in a position to fund it." "Eleanor," he paused. "You were managing a hostile legal campaign and designing a school simultaneously." "I had quiet evenings," she said. Samuel Reed, who had not laughed in a professional context in approximately 30 years, made a sound that came close. The news reached Charlottesville in layers. The way significant news always does. First as rumor, then as confirmed fact, then as the kind of established reality that people discuss, as though they knew it all along. Nathaniel Hawthorne had left Virginia. He had not announced it. He had settled quietly in Richmond in modest rooms on what remained of his personal account. He was seen occasionally by people who then reported back to people who then reported to Mrs. Fenton, who served as Charlottesville's most efficient and least malicious information exchange. He was said to be humbled. He was said to be working in some capacity that no one could quite specify. He was said to be sober more often than not, which was noted as an improvement. Eleanor heard all of this from Mrs. Fenton directly over tea in the Hawthorne Hall parlor one afternoon in June, and she listened to it with the attentiveness she gave to all information, without the emotional weight that it might have carried 6 months earlier. "And Miss Pierce?" Eleanor asked. "In Fredericksburg with her mother?" Mrs. Fenton said. "The child was born in May, a boy." She watched Eleanor's face carefully. Healthy by all accounts. Eleanor nodded. "Good," she said, and meant it. "Mrs. Fenton sat down her cup. She had the manner of a woman approaching the thing she actually came to say. "Eleanor," she said, "there is talk. There is always talk. Specifically, there is talk about what you are building, the schoolhouse, the timber arrangement, the settlement of the tradesmen debts." She folded her hands. "People are paying attention. People are welcome to pay attention," Eleanor said. "Several of the county families have asked me privately whether you would accept contributions toward the school's operating fund." Mrs. Fenton's expression was careful and precise. "I told them I would ask." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She had not anticipated this, or rather, she had hoped for it eventually, in the second or third year, once the school had demonstrated its value. "Not in June. Not 4 months after everything had changed. Tell them, yes," she said. "Tell them the founding committee meets the first Thursday of next month, and anyone who wants to contribute their name to something worth doing is welcome at that table." Mrs. Fenton smiled. It was not a small smile. "I will tell them," she said. "And Eleanor," she added, "I would like to be at that table myself." Eleanor looked at her across the tea table. This woman, who had stood beside her at the ball and offered alliance when it mattered, who had watched with the careful eyes of someone who understood exactly what was happening and had chosen the right side without being asked. And she felt a warmth she had not let herself feel in a long time. "I was going to ask you to chair it," Eleanor said. Mrs. Fenton picked up her teacup with the composure of a woman who is pleased and has decided to be gracious about it. "Well," she said, "then we have a great deal to discuss." The letter from Charlotte arrived in July. Eleanor almost did not open it. She held it in her hands for a full minute, standing in the entrance hall with the afternoon light coming through the windows, feeling the weight of whatever was inside. Then, she broke the seal and read it. It was not long. Charlotte Pierce was not a woman who used more words than she needed. something Eleanor had not fully appreciated during the months they had spent as adversaries under the same roof, but recognized now. Mrs. Whitmore, I am writing because I owe you a debt. I cannot repay financially, and I was taught that debts of integrity matter more than any other kind. You told me the truth when you did not have to. You told me I was not your enemy when you had every reason to treat me as one. You did not destroy me when destroying me would have been easy and perhaps justified. My son's name is James. He is healthy. I am managing. I do not expect friendship. I am not asking for it. I only wanted you to know that I understand now what kind of woman you are. And I am sorry that I did not understand it sooner. Yours in honesty, C. Pierce. Eleanor read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the desk drawer, not discarded, not displayed, but kept because it was honest. And honest things deserve to be kept. She wrote back that same evening. For Sentence. Miss Pierce, thank you for writing. I am glad the boy is healthy. You were lied to by someone who had practiced lying for a long time. That is not nothing, and I hope you will be kind to yourself about it. E. Whitmore. She sealed it and gave it to the stable hand before she could reconsider the kindness of it. Then she went back to her desk and her plans and the work that was waiting. The schoolhouse broke ground on the 14th of August. Eleanor was there when the first timber came down, not watching from a distance, but standing at the edge of the north lot with Mr. Holt and two other founding committee members, watching the work begin with the particular satisfaction of a person who has seen something in their mind for a long time and is now watching it become real. Samuel stood beside her. He had his good coat on, which was his way of marking occasions. Your father would have built this 20 years ago if someone had asked him, he said. Someone should have asked him, Eleanor said. I'm asking myself instead. A man from the county surveyor's office approached with a question about the property boundary markers, and Eleanor answered it without consulting anyone because she had reviewed those boundaries herself 3 times and knew them exactly. The surveyor left, looking satisfied. Samuel watched this without comment. You're going to need additional legal counsel, he said when the surveyor was gone. When the school is chartered, the documentation for a formal institution is different from estate management. I know, Eleanor said. I was hoping you would take it on. I am 55 years old. You are the most precise legal mind in this county, and you enjoy useful work, Eleanor said. Don't pretend retirement interests you. Samuel looked out at the timber lot where men were working with the focused energy of people doing something that matters. No, he said after a moment. It doesn't. Then you'll take it on. I'll take it on, he said. The twist that Eleanor had not allowed herself to expect came on a Wednesday in September, in the form of a visitor she had not been told to anticipate. She was in the library, where she always was, where she did her best thinking and her most important work, when Molly knocked and said there was a gentleman from Philadelphia asking to see her. Not a name Molly recognized. A younger man, she said, well dressed with a letter of introduction. Eleanor said to show him in. He was perhaps 30, with the careful manner of someone in a profession that required precision. He introduced himself as Mr. Thomas Carey, associate of a Philadelphia law firm. She recognized from the debt documentation the firm that had represented the fourth lender, the consortium, the loan that had triggered the covenant and started the final sequence of everything. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, holding his hat in both hands. My firm has become aware of the Hawthorne estate resolution and the work you are undertaking on the North property. I am here on behalf of a client who has asked me to convey an interest in your school project. Eleanor studied him. Which client? A Mrs. Adelaide Marsh of Philadelphia. She is a widow of some means and considerable interest in educational initiatives for working families. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. She has asked me to deliver this and to say that if you are willing, she would welcome a correspondence. Eleanor took the envelope, opened it. Inside was a bank draft. The amount was significant enough that she read it twice to be sure she had the figure right. Beneath it was a handwritten note in a firm, clear hand. I have heard what you are building and why. I have been trying to fund exactly this for 3 years without finding the right person to trust with it. I believe I have found her now. Build something that lasts. A Marsh. Eleanor looked up at Mr. Carey. How did Mrs. Marsh hear about the school? Mrs. Fenton wrote to her, he said. They are old friends. Eleanor sat back in her chair and looked at the draft in her hands and felt the specific wonder of a thing that has grown beyond what you originally drew on the page, taken on its own momentum, attracted its own people, become larger than the anger or the pain or the quiet determination that first sparked it. She thought about the woman she had been in August of 1818, standing in this same room with a letter in her hand and a husband who had just walked through the front door with someone else's future on his arm. She thought about the steady hand, the list with one word at the top. She had written everything when she was fighting to survive. She had written begin when she understood she had won. She had not known in either of those moments what everything would eventually mean, what begin would eventually become. Tell Mrs. Marsh, Eleanor said, that I accept and that I will write to her this week, and that the school will carry a name worthy of what she is contributing to it. Mr. Carey nodded, put on his hat, and left. Eleanor set the bank draft on the desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. The Whitmore School opened its doors on the 3rd of November 1819 to 31 students, children of farmers, tradespeople, a blacksmith, a seamstress, a freed family who had settled in the county 2 years prior, and whose eldest daughter, at 11 years old, read at a level that made both teachers catch their breath on the first day. Eleanor was there for every hour of it. She stood at the back of the main room and watched 31 children take their seats for the first time in a building that had not existed 6 months ago. In a room funded by a campaign that had begun with a letter in a coat lining. And she felt something she recognized finally as peace. Not the peace of resignation. Not the peace of someone who has given up wanting. The peace of someone who has built a life that is entirely, irreversibly, and without apology, her own. Mrs. Fenton stood beside her. You did this, she said quietly. We did this, Eleanor said. Eleanor. Mrs. Fenton looked at her with the directness of a woman who has earned the right to say true things plainly. When Nathaniel walked through that door with Charlotte Pierce, every person in this county looked at you and saw a woman whose life was over. She paused. They were watching the wrong thing. They were watching him. They should have been watching you. Eleanor looked at the children settling into their seats. 31 futures in a room that smelled of new timber and fresh ink, and she said, let them watch now. Virginia remembered Nathaniel Hawthorne the way it remembered most cautionary tales, briefly and without warmth. His name appeared in conversations as a shorthand for a certain kind of foolishness, a certain kind of pride that mistakes performance for substance and borrowed time for permanence. But the Whitmore School stood for generations. The children who learned to read in that room taught their own children, who taught theirs. The freed family's eldest daughter became a teacher herself, and then a school founder in her own right. And she told her students for the rest of her life about the woman who had built the room where she first understood what she was capable of. Eleanor Whitmore never remarried, not because she was incapable of love, but because she had learned at considerable cost and with absolute clarity that a life built on your own terms is worth more than any arrangement built on someone else's. She managed Hawthorne Hall, the Whitmore shipping interests, and the school with the same steady competence she had always brought to everything, and she did it without apology and without performance. And she did it well. She corresponded with Adelaide Marsh for 30 years. They became in time the kind of friends that women become when they recognize in each other the same quality, the willingness to build something real out of whatever the world hands them, without waiting for permission. Samuel Reed served as the school's legal counsel until he retired at 68, at which point Eleanor threw him a dinner party that he called unnecessary and attended with visible pleasure. And on the last night of every November, for the rest of her life, Eleanor Whitmore sat at the desk in the library of Hawthorne Hall, her desk in her library in her house, and she opened the ledger she had been keeping since the morning she wrote everything, at the top of a blank page, and she read through it from the beginning, not out of grief, not out of anger, out of gratitude for what she had survived, for what she had built, for the woman she had been required by circumstance and necessity, and the specific cruelty of a man who had underestimated her to become. The teacup sat on the corner of the desk where she always kept it. She had never replaced it. Some things you keep not because they make you happy, but because they remind you of the exact moment you decided who you were going to be, and the decision you made was the right one, and you would make it again, and you know it, and that knowledge is enough. Eleanor Whitmore had set that cup down without a sound, in a room full of witnesses on the worst night of her life. And everything she had built since then was proof that the steadiest hands belong to the women the world most badly underestimates.